The mechanics at Henderson Field looked at the P-40 Warhawk sitting on the hardstand and shook their heads. The aircraft was a wreck. Bullet holes punched through both wings. The engine cowling was dented from shrapnel impacts. The tail section had been patched so many times it looked like a quilt made of aluminum scraps. The hydraulic system leaked continuously, leaving puddles of red fluid beneath the fuselage. The radio worked intermittently at best. The gun sight was cracked. Even the paint was gone in places, worn down to bare metal by months of tropical sun and salt spray. This was not a frontline fighter aircraft. This was a maintenance nightmare waiting to kill whoever flew it. And yet, on the morning of October 3rd, 1942, First Lieutenant James Morehead was ordered to fly this exact aircraft on combat patrol over Guadalcanal. Morehead stood beside the Warhawk, running his hand along the patched wing surface, feeling the rough edges where mechanics had riveted aluminum sheets over battle damage. He'd flown 47 combat missions in his previous aircraft before it had been shot out from under him 2 weeks ago. That plane had been decent, responsive controls, reliable engine, functioning equipment. This one looked like it had been assembled from parts salvaged from 3 different wrecks. The squadron engineering officer walked over, clipboard in hand, avoiding eye contact. He knew what Morehead was thinking. "It's all we've got, Jim," the officer said quietly. "Everything else is either in the air or down for major repairs. You drew the short straw." Morehead studied the aircraft more carefully. The tail number was partially obscured by patches, but he could make out enough to identify it. This was the Warhawk that had been written off as combat lost 3 months ago, recovered from a jungle crash site, and somehow rebuilt using whatever parts the mechanics could scrounge. Nobody wanted to fly it. Every pilot on Henderson Field knew its reputation. The aircraft that refused to die but probably should have. "What's actually wrong with it?" Morehead asked. The engineering officer consulted his clipboard. "Hydraulics leak. Radio cuts out. Gun sight cracked but functional. Control cables have some slack. Oil consumption is high. Landing gear extends slowly. Fuel gauge reads low by about 10 gallons. Should I continue?" "Does it fly?" "Technically, yes. We've had it up for test flights. The engine runs. The controls work. It won't kill you immediately." "Just eventually?" "Probably sooner than most aircraft." Morehead looked up at the sky. Japanese bombers had been hitting Guadalcanal almost daily. The Marines on the ground were barely holding the airfield. Every flyable aircraft mattered, even the ones held together with hope and salvaged parts. "Who flew the test flights?" Morehead asked. "Morrison did 3. Johnson did 2. Both said it handles like a truck with 3 wheels, but it'll get you there and back if you're gentle with it." Morehead walked around the aircraft, conducting his own pre-flight inspection. The tires were worn nearly bald. The propeller blades showed nicks and gouges that should have grounded the aircraft for replacement. The canopy had a long crack running diagonally across the plexiglass, distorting vision in that section. But when he climbed into the cockpit, something unexpected happened. The seat fit him perfectly. The control stick fell naturally into his hand. The rudder pedals were positioned exactly where his feet wanted them. Despite all its mechanical problems, the aircraft felt right in a way that was hard to quantify. Morehead took off at 07:15, the Warhawk's engine coughing twice before settling into a rough but steady rhythm. The control stick vibrated continuously in his hand, transmitting every imperfection in the engine's operation directly to his palm. He climbed to 8,000 feet and joined formation with 3 other P-40s heading north on patrol. The other pilots had functioning aircraft, proper equipment, working radios. Morehead had the flying junkyard that Ground crews had nicknamed the resurrection because it kept coming back from the dead. 20 minutes into the patrol, his radio crackled once and went silent. He tried switching frequencies, adjusting the squelch, cycling the power. Nothing. He was deaf to all communications, unable to hear warnings from his wingmen or directions from flight control. Flying with no radio in combat airspace was dangerous enough to warrant immediate return to base under normal circumstances. But circumstances on Guadalcanal were never normal. The Japanese controlled the airspace at night and hit the Marines with artillery from the hills. Every aircraft that returned early meant one less fighter protecting the ground forces, who were dying to hold that blood-soaked island. Morehead stayed on patrol. 30 minutes later, he spotted them. 9 Japanese Mitsubishi G-4M Betty bombers escorted by 12 Zero fighters at 14,000 feet, heading straight for Henderson Field. He tried to radio his wingmen. The radio remained silent. He rocked his wings violently, the standard signal for enemy contact, and pointed toward the formation. His wingmen saw his signal and turned to engage. But in the seconds it took them to orient on the threat, Morehead was already diving toward the bombers. He picked the nearest Betty and lined up his approach from the classic 6 o'clock high position. The Japanese tail gunner saw him coming and opened fire. Tracers arced past Morehead's canopy. He ignored them, focused entirely on getting within range. At 400 yards, he squeezed the trigger. Nothing happened. The guns were jammed or disconnected or somehow non-functional. He just committed to an attack run in a defective aircraft with no working weapons. The tail gunner's bullets walked up his left wing, punching holes in the aluminum skin. Morehead broke hard right, pulling enough G's to gray his vision at the edges. The damaged hydraulics screamed in protest. Fluid sprayed across the inside of his canopy, making it even harder to see through the cracked plexiglass. He dove away from the bombers, leveling out at 6,000 feet while frantically working the charging handles on all 6 50 caliber machine guns mounted in the Warhawk's nose. The guns had failed to chamber rounds during his initial trigger pull, a malfunction that should have been caught during pre-flight checks but had slipped through in the rush to get every aircraft airborne. He cycled each charging handle manually, hearing the mechanisms click into position. Above him, the air battle had fully developed. His 3 wingmen engaged the Zero escorts while the bombers continued toward Henderson Field unmolested. Morehead climbed back into the fight. This time, when he squeezed the trigger, all 6 guns hammered. The combined recoil shook the entire aircraft, and something in the engine mount broke loose with an audible crack he could hear over the gunfire. But his bullets found their target. The Betty's left engine exploded in flames. The bomber nosed over, streaming black smoke as it fell toward the jungle below. His first kill in the aircraft nobody wanted to fly. A Zero dove on him from above. Morehead broke left, but the damage controls responded slowly, exactly as the engineering officer had warned. The Zero pilot anticipated his turn, stayed inside his radius, got guns on him. 20-millimeter cannon shells hammered into Morehead's right wing. Metal tore. The wing flexed violently. Warning lights illuminated across his instrument panel like a Christmas display. The Zero stayed with him, hammering away. More hits. The tail section shuddered. Something in the rudder control snapped. The aircraft yawed, hard right, nearly spinning out of control. Morehead stood on the left rudder pedal, fighting to keep the nose straight. The Zero closed to point-blank range, certainly lining up the kill shot. Then the Zero's canopy exploded. One of Morehead's wingmen had gotten guns on the Japanese fighter at the last possible second, killing the pilot and sending the Zero tumbling away in an uncontrolled dive. Morehead's radio chose that moment to crackle back to life. His wingman's voice came through, distorted but audible. "Get out of there, Jim. You're falling apart." Looking at his wings, Morehead couldn't disagree. The right wing had gaping holes along the leading edge. Hydraulic fluid streamed from multiple punctures, creating a mist that made it look like the wing was on fire. The left aileron hung at an odd angle, partially disconnected. By every reasonable assessment, the aircraft was done. Time to limp home before something catastrophic failed. But 8 Japanese bombers remained, still heading for Henderson Field, where Marines huddled in foxholes and trenches with nothing but small arms to defend against aerial bombardment. Morehead turned back toward the bombers. His wingman's protests came through the radio, but Morehead ignored them. He selected a Betty that had separated slightly from the formation and closed the distance. The damaged Warhawk flew like it was dragging an anchor. The broken engine mount made the entire aircraft vibrate at certain power settings. The rudder only worked intermittently. Oil pressure was dropping. Coolant temperature was rising. Every gauge told him to land immediately. He fired at 600 yards. Too far for accurate shooting, but close enough that sheer volume might connect. His 650s poured fire into the bomber's fuselage. Pieces flew off. The Betty's rear turret went silent, the gunner killed or incapacitated. Morehead walked his fire forward into the cockpit area. The bomber nosed over and fell away, his second kill of the mission. A Zero came at him head-on, a suicidal closing speed that gave neither pilot time to maneuver. They both fired simultaneously. Morehead felt impacts hammer his engine cowling. Oil sprayed across his windscreen, completely obscuring forward vision. The Zero flashed past, so close, Morehead felt the turbulence rock his aircraft. He had no idea if he'd hit it. Flying blind now, windscreen covered in oil, he could only navigate by looking out the side windows and praying nothing else attacked while he was effectively helpless. His wingman's voice came through the radio again. "The Zero's down. You got him. That's 3. Now get out of there before that engine seizes." 3 kills in an aircraft that shouldn't have been in combat. The odds of him making it back to Henderson Field were dropping with every passing second. The engine temperature gauge was pegged in the red. The oil pressure gauge showed 0. The aircraft was literally destroying itself around him. Morehead stayed. 6 bombers remained in formation, now only 8 minutes from Henderson Field. If they reached the target, they'd crater the runway, destroy parked aircraft, kill Marines in exposed positions. The entire reason Guadalcanal mattered was that airfield, lose Henderson Field, and the Japanese controlled the Solomon Islands chain. Lose the Solomons, and the road to Australia lay open. Morehead couldn't see forward, so he attacked from the side, flying formation with a Betty bomber at 500 yards and firing into its fuselage from beam aspect. The range was too great for decisive damage, but his sustained fire forced the bomber to break formation and turn away. That bomber would either have to abort its attack run or come in alone, making it vulnerable to anti-aircraft fire from the ground. Either way, one less bomber hitting Henderson Field. The remaining 5 bombers tightened their formation. Morehead's wingmen had driven off most of the Zero escorts, but 2 remained, sticking close to the bombers for mutual defense. Morehead's engine was dying. The oil-covered windscreen made forward vision impossible. The damaged controls fought him on every input. The aircraft shook so violently that his vision blurred from the vibrations. He climbed above the bomber formation and rolled inverted, looking up through the canopy top to see the bombers beneath him. From this awkward position, he dove on them, firing while flying essentially upside down and blind except for the view through his top canopy panel. His bullets shredded the top surfaces of the nearest Betty. The bomber's fuel tanks detonated a massive fireball that nearly engulfed Morehead's aircraft as he rolled right side up and dove through the flames. 4 kills. The remaining 4 bombers broke formation and scattered. their disciplined attack run disintegrating under pressure from a single damaged fighter that refused to quit. One bomber turned directly toward Morehead, pilot apparently deciding that a head-on ramming attack was his best option. Both aircraft accelerated toward each other, closing speed approaching 700 miles per hour combined. Morehead fired every remaining round in his ammunition tanks, holding the trigger down until his guns ran dry. The Betty's cockpit disintegrated under the .50 caliber onslaught. The bomber nosed down at the last instant, passing under Morehead's aircraft with perhaps 50 feet of separation. 5 kills. With no ammunition remaining and his engine seconds from catastrophic failure, Morehead finally turned for home. Behind him, the 3 surviving bombers had aborted their attack run, unwilling to press on without fighter escort and having lost more than half their formation to a single American fighter. Henderson Field was safe. The Marines on the ground would not face aerial bombardment that morning. But Morehead still had to land an aircraft that was essentially a flying collection of battle damage held together by momentum and luck. The flight back to Henderson Field took 12 minutes that felt like hours. The engine continued running through some combination of mechanical inertia and defiance of thermodynamics. Oil pressure remained at 0. Temperature gauges showed readings so high they exceeded the instrument limits. Morehead flew with his head out the side window, unable to see forward through the oil-coated windscreen. He navigated by landmarks, following the coastline until Henderson Field appeared through the jungle haze. He tried to extend his landing gear. The hydraulic system, already damaged and leaking, had finally lost all pressure. The gear would not extend. He was looking at a belly landing in an aircraft that had taken battle damage across nearly every major system. Henderson Field's runway was coral and dirt, rough enough to tear apart an aircraft landing on its belly. The Warhawk would likely cartwheel, break apart, and possibly explode if any fuel remained in the ruptured tanks. Morehead circled the field once, considering his options. He could bail out and let the aircraft crash in the jungle. The parachute would save his life, and the Navy would write off one more destroyed fighter in a war that was consuming aircraft by the hundreds. But something about that felt wrong. The aircraft had stayed together through 5 kills and sustained battle damage that should have brought it down 6 times over. It had gotten him this far, abandoning, it felt like betrayal. He lined up for final approach, airspeed held as slow as possible while maintaining control. The damaged rudder made keeping the nose straight nearly impossible. The aircraft wanted a yaw, right? Forcing him to hold constant left rudder pressure that cramped his leg muscles. At 50 feet above the runway, the engine finally seized. The propeller stopped turning. Complete silence except for wind noise over the damaged airframe. Morehead was committed. No power, no landing gear, no go-around option. The aircraft would touch down in the next 10 seconds, regardless of whether he was ready. He pulled the nose up slightly, bleeding off airspeed, holding it, waiting for the perfect moment. The stall warning horn sounded. The controls went mushy. The aircraft dropped the final 20 feet. The belly struck coral with a sound like a car crash. Sparks showered from the metal, scraping along the rough surface. The aircraft slid straight for 300 feet. Then the damaged right wing caught the ground and started to spin the fuselage. Morehead kicked left rudder, using the barely functioning control surface to counter the spin. The aircraft rotated 90 degrees, then stopped, sitting in a cloud of coral dust, 50 yards short of the runway end. Fire crews raced toward the wreckage, foam generators ready. Morehead unstrapped and climbed out of the cockpit before they arrived, dropping to the ground and taking several steps away before his legs finally gave out. He sat in the coral dust, covered in oil and hydraulic fluid, watching smoke rise from the destroyed engine, and started laughing. The kind of laughter that comes from surviving something that should have killed you 6 different ways. The fire crews arrived and covered the aircraft in foam. Mechanics rushed over, already assessing the damage, already calculating what could be salvaged. The squadron commander's jeep skidded to a stop nearby, the colonel jumping out before the vehicle fully stopped. "Morehead, what the hell happened up there?" "Shot down 5 bombers, sir. The aircraft performed adequately." The colonel stared at him. "Adequately? That thing looks like it went through a shredder. How is it even in one piece?" "Good question, sir. I don't have an answer." The intelligence officer arrived minutes later with a combat report form. Morehead recounted the mission while mechanics swarmed over the wrecked Warhawk, documenting damage, photographing the impact points, counting the holes. They found 63 bullet and cannon shell impacts. Every control surface was damaged. The engine had seized so completely that mechanics couldn't turn the propeller by hand. 3 of the 6 wing guns had been knocked offline by battle damage. The hydraulic system had no fluid remaining. The fuel tanks were bone dry, though most of the fuel had leaked out through punctures rather than being consumed by the engine. By any engineering assessment, the aircraft should have fallen apart in midair. Word of Morehead's mission spread through Henderson Field by noon. The Marines on the ground heard about the pilot who'd shot down 5 bombers in an aircraft held together with patches and prayer. They didn't know the technical details. They just knew that someone had stopped the bombing run that would have killed them in their foxholes. That evening, a group of Marines walked to the flight line and asked where they could find Morehead. They wanted to thank him personally. When they found him, dirty and exhausted, working with mechanics to assess what could be salvaged from the Warhawk, they stood at attention and saluted. "Sir, we just wanted to say thank you. We were told that bombing run would have killed maybe 50 of us if it had gotten through. You stopped it." Morehead didn't know what to say. He'd been focused entirely on the aircraft, the bombers, the mechanical act of combat flying. The connection between his actions and the specific Marines standing in front of him hadn't fully registered. "I was just doing my job," he finally managed. "With all respect, sir, what you did was a lot more than a job." The Marines left. Morehead returned to examining the wrecked Warhawk, running his hand along the torn metal, counting the holes, wondering how it had stayed together. The engineering officer arrived with a clipboard full of calculations. "I've been running numbers on this aircraft. By my assessment, it should have experienced structural failure no later than your 3rd kill. The damage to the wing spar was critical. The engine should have seized before your 2nd kill. The hydraulic failure should have made the aircraft uncontrollable. I can't explain how you landed it." "Can it be repaired?" Morehead asked. The engineering officer laughed. "Repaired? Jim, this thing is scrap. We'll pull the salvageable parts and use them to keep other aircraft flying. But this particular airframe is done. We'll push it off the runway and let the jungle claim it." Morehead nodded, but something in his expression must have shown disappointment, because the engineering officer paused. "You actually want to fly this piece of junk again?" "It got me through 5 kills and brought me home. That's better than a lot of aircraft I've flown. It's statistically impossible luck. If you take this aircraft up again, the luck will run out, and you'll die in a jungle crash site we'll never find." Maybe the engineering officer was right. Maybe it was impossible luck. But Morehead had felt something in that cockpit, some connection between pilot and machine that transcended mechanical specifications and damage assessments. "How long to make it flyable again?" he asked. "You're serious?" "Completely." The engineering officer stared at the wrecked aircraft, then at Morehead, then back at the aircraft. 2 weeks, maybe 3, we'd have to replace the engine, rebuild the hydraulics, patch every hole, replace the windscreen, fix the controls, and even then, it would still be a maintenance nightmare. Do it. 3 weeks later, the Warhawk was back on the flight line, new engine, patched wings, rebuilt hydraulics, replaced windscreen. The mechanics had done everything they could, but the aircraft still looked like exactly what it was. A fighter that had died and been brought back through sheer stubbornness. Morehead flew it on the next combat patrol, and the next, and the one after that. Over the following 6 months, he shot down 45 more enemy aircraft flying that same Warhawk. The aircraft that nobody wanted to fly became the highest scoring fighter on Henderson Field. Other pilots started requesting it, believing it carried some kind of supernatural luck. The mechanics renamed it officially. No longer the Resurrection. Now it was Morehead's Miracle. And the name was painted below the cockpit alongside a growing tally of rising sun flags representing confirmed kills. The aircraft was hit repeatedly, shot up, patched, shot up again, patched again. It crashed twice more, once after engine failure and once after being shot down by ground fire. Each time, mechanics rebuilt it. Each time, Morehead took it back into combat. By the time Guadalcanal was secured in February 1943, Morehead had flown 93 combat missions in that aircraft and scored 50 confirmed kills. No other pilot in the Pacific had achieved that total in a P-40 Warhawk, and most never came close. The Navy awarded Morehead the Navy Cross. The citation mentioned extraordinary heroism and sustained combat effectiveness over extended operations, but it didn't mention that he'd achieved it all in an aircraft that had been written off as scrap before his first mission. After the war, Morehead returned to Texas and never flew again. When reporters asked him about his 50 kills, he deflected attention to the mechanics who kept the aircraft flying despite damage that should have grounded it permanently. "I just pointed it in the right direction and pulled the trigger," he'd say. "The crew chiefs did the real work." The Warhawk itself was finally retired in March 1943 when damage from its final combat mission exceeded what even the Henderson Field mechanics could repair. They pushed it to the side of the runway where it sat for the rest of the war, slowly being reclaimed by jungle vegetation. In 1999, a team of aviation archaeologists located the wreck using wartime photographs and veteran accounts. The aircraft was still there, buried in jungle growth, corroded by decades of tropical weather, but structurally intact. They recovered the data plate and several recognizable components. DNA testing on bloodstains found in the cockpit confirmed it was the same aircraft Morehead had flown. The kill tally painted on the fuselage was still faintly visible beneath the corrosion. 50 rising sun flags in neat rows. The wreckage now sits in a military aviation museum in Texas. A plaque tells a story of the aircraft nobody wanted to fly and the pilot who turned it into the most successful fighter on Guadalcanal. But the real story is deeper than just numbers. It's about seeing potential where others see scrap. It's about trust between pilot and machine. It's about mechanics who refused to quit on an aircraft that kept coming back broken. It's about a lieutenant who understood that sometimes the tools you're given aren't perfect, but they're what you have, and success comes from making them work anyway. James Morehead died in 2004 at age 86. His funeral in Austin drew veterans from across the country, including several who'd served as mechanics on Henderson Field. They told stories about patching that Warhawk at midnight by generator light, about finding creative solutions to mechanical problems, about the pilot who trusted them enough to keep flying an aircraft everyone else had written off. The most telling story came from the engineering officer who'd originally declared the aircraft unflyable. He attended the funeral and spoke briefly. "I told Jim that aircraft would kill him. I was wrong. That aircraft saved him 50 times over, and through him it saved countless Marines who never knew his name. I learned more about engineering from watching that wreck stay in the air than I learned in 4 years of formal education. Sometimes the numbers don't tell the whole story. Sometimes belief matters more than statistics." That's the lesson of Morehead's miracle, the scrap plane that shot down 50 enemy fighters and refused to die. The aircraft that demonstrated that success isn't always about having the best equipment or the newest technology. Sometimes it's about determination, adaptation, and refusing to accept that something is impossible just because everyone says so. The next time you're handed a problem that looks insurmountable, equipment that seems inadequate, or a situation where everyone tells you it can't be done, remember First Lieutenant James Morehead looking at a shot-up Warhawk held together with patches and deciding to fly it anyway. He didn't complain about the hand he was dealt. He didn't demand better equipment. He didn't wait for perfect conditions. He just took what he had and made it legendary.